The night Maggie's tavern almost burned to the ground began with laughter so loud it shook the rafters. Music thundered from a battered drum at the far end of the hall, its rhythm pulsing through the wooden floor like a living heart. Wolves danced in rough circles, boots stomping, tails swaying, hands clasping as firelight leapt across their scarred faces. Ale sloshed from chipped mugs, splashing onto the floor, soaking into old wood that had tasted more joy than most places in the kingdom ever would. And behind the long counter stood Maggie. She wiped a mug with a rag that had seen better days, her dark hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up, eyes bright as she watched her people laugh. Every grin in this room mattered to her. Every bark of laughter was a victory. Because this place had not been built for comfort. It had been built for survival. The tavern was called the Low Den, a name the nobles once mocked. But Maggie wore it like a badge of honor. This was where the rejected came. The limping. The scarred. The wolves too poor, too rough, too forgotten to be welcome in silk-draped halls. Here no one was low. And everyone knew the one rule carved deeper than any mark on the walls. No nobles allowed. Not their gold. Not their names. Not their excuses. Maggie had made that rule herself, years ago, the day she'd been dragged out of a noble's tavern with her father, because they were dirty and unfit for decent eyes. She had never forgotten the way the door slammed in their faces. The way laughter followed, so she built her own doors, and behind them, she kept the nobles out. A roar of cheers rose as two wolves spun clumsily into a table, sending mugs rattling. Maggie laughed, leaning over the counter. "Easy there, Thomas. You break my tables, you fix them." Thomas grinned, raising his mug in apology before being dragged back into the dance. Maggie shook her head, warmth spreading in her chest. This chaos, this loud, messy joy, was her pride. These wolves were hers, not by blood, by choice. She moved along the counter, refilling mugs, trading teasing words, resting a hand on a shoulder here, squeezing a wrist there. They looked to her, not as a boss, but as a shield. And she carried that weight gladly. Fire crackled in the hearth, sending sparks climbing up the chimney. The smell of roasted meat mixed with sweat, ale, and the clean bite of night air slipping in through cracked windows. It was loud. It was rough. It was home. Then the music faltered. Not all at once. Just a hitch in the rhythm. A drummer's hand slowing. A dancer missing a step. Maggie felt it before she understood it. A scent cut through the warmth of ale and smoke. Sharp, clean, foreign, noble blood. Her spine stiffened. Around the room, wolves froze. Laughter died mid-breath. Growls rolled low from chests, a warning ripple spreading like a wave. Hands dropped to sides where claws could spring free. Every eye turned toward the door. It creaked open. Cold night air rushed in, snuffing a few candles, and in the doorway stood a figure that did not belong. An old woman. She was wrapped in robes that had once been rich. Deep royal colors now faded, hems frayed, embroidery dulled by time. Silver hair spilled loose around her shoulders. Her posture sagged, as if the weight of the world pressed on her thin frame. She blinked into the tavern light, confused, lost. Her eyes moved from face to face, wide and uncertain, as if she had no idea where she was or how she had come to stand among growling wolves. The room erupted in snarls. "What's a noble doing here? She's got nerve. Throw her out." Two heavily built wolves pushed forward from the crowd, muscles bunching, fangs flashing. Maggie felt the room tipping, fury ready to spill into violence. She slammed her hand on the counter. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Every head snapped toward her. The two wolves hesitated, then turned, frustration burning in their eyes. "Maggie, you made the rule," one of them growled. "No nobles. You know what they do to us." "I know," Maggie said, stepping out from behind the counter. She walked toward the door, boots steady on the wooden floor, passing between tense bodies. She felt their anger like heat on her skin. They were right to hate. She hated too. But when she reached the old woman, Maggie didn't see silk or status. She saw trembling hands. She saw eyes clouded with fear. The woman flinched as Maggie approached, then whispered, barely loud enough to hear, I'm sorry. I think I'm lost." Her voice shook, not with pride, with confusion. Maggie's jaw tightened. For a moment, the tavern held its breath. She turned back to her wolves. "She's not here to mock us," Maggie said. "Look at her. She doesn't even know where she is." "She's noble blood," another wolf spat. "That's enough." Maggie looked at the woman again, the way she clutched her robes, the way her eyes darted like a frightened pup's. Then Maggie made her choice. "She's staying," she said. The door thudded shut behind them, but the tension did not leave. It clung to the tavern like smoke. Growls still rolled low in chests. Wolves shifted on their feet, eyes never leaving the old woman Maggie had brought in. The music was dead now. Only the crackle of the hearth and the uneasy scrape of boots against wood filled the silence. Maggie guided the woman toward the counter, her hand steady on the frail arm. Up close, she could see how thin she was, how her fingers trembled as if the cold of the night had followed her inside. The woman kept glancing around, lost, frightened, as though every face was a stranger in a dream she could not wake from. "It's all right," Maggie murmured. "No one will hurt you." A bitter laugh cut through the air. "You sure about that?" Thomas growled from the crowd. "She's noble. That's reason enough." Others murmured in agreement. Old wounds surfaced in hard eyes, memories of lashes, of stolen wages, of being driven from lands that had once fed their families. Maggie straightened and faced them. "I know what they've done to us," she said, voice firm. "Every scar in this room tells that story. But look at her. Does she look like someone who came here to hurt us?" The old woman flinched at a sudden bark of laughter from the back, shrinking into herself. Her breath hitched, eyes wide with panic. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't mean to come where I'm not wanted. I heard music. And then I was here." Maggie felt something twist in her chest. She turned back to the woman. "What's your name?" The woman opened her mouth, closed it. Her brow furrowed. She pressed trembling fingers to her temple, as if searching through fog. I don't know," she said at last, shame creeping into her voice. "I know I should, but it's gone." A murmur rippled through the tavern. "She's lying." "No noble forgets who they are. It's a trick." The woman shook her head quickly. "I'm not lying, I swear. Everything feels broken." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know where home is." Maggie studied her. There was no cunning in those eyes, no pride, only confusion, raw and real. She gestured to a stool by the counter. "Sit," Maggie said. The woman hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself carefully, as if afraid the world might tilt beneath her. A loud clang from a mug being set down too hard nearby made her jump, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Maggie shot a warning look at the wolves. "Enough." Silence followed. She poured a mug of warm broth instead of ale and slid it toward the woman. "Drink, it'll help." The woman wrapped both hands around the mug, savoring the warmth like it was a gift. "Thank you," she said, eyes shining. "You're very kind." That word, kind, hit Maggie harder than any insult ever had. Thomas stepped forward again, jaw tight. "Maggie, this is wrong. You made the rule. No nobles. We trusted you." "I know," Maggie said, not turning to face him. "And I won't forget that rule. But tonight, I'm choosing to see a person before a title." "You're breaking your own law," another wolf snapped. "Yes," Maggie replied. "I am." The admission sent a ripple through the room. Some looked away in anger, others hesitated, torn. Maggie finally turned to face them all. "This tavern was built for the broken," she said, "for those who had nowhere else to go. Tell me, does she look like she has anywhere else tonight?" No one answered. The old woman sipped the broth, then looked up at Maggie with timid hope. "I don't want to be trouble," she said. "If I am, I can leave." Maggie placed a hand over hers, warm and steady. "You won't leave," she said gently. "Not tonight." She nodded toward a small door behind the counter that led to a narrow back room. "I have a bed. It's not soft, but it's safe. And in the morning, we'll figure things out together." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "I don't remember much," she whispered. "But I think I've been alone for a long time." Maggie squeezed her hand. "Not anymore." Around them, the tavern remained divided, some wolves burning with resentment, others watching in uneasy silence. But Maggie had already made her choice. She handed the woman a piece of bread, warm from the hearth. "Eat," she said. "Then I'll show you where you can rest." The old woman took it with trembling fingers, gratitude written across her face. And as Maggie led her toward the back room, she had no idea that this fragile stranger, who could not even remember her own name, carried a past powerful enough to shake the entire kingdom. Morning crept into the low den on pale fingers of light. Maggie was already awake. She sat on a stool behind the counter, watching the old woman sleep on the narrow cot in the back room. The fire had burned low, embers glowing like quiet eyes in the hearth. Outside, the tavern was silent for once, the echoes of last night's laughter replaced by the soft rhythm of breathing. The woman stirred, brow creasing as if caught in a dream she couldn't hold. Then her eyes opened. For a heartbeat, calm, then fear. She sat up suddenly, clutching the thin blanket to her chest. "Where am I?" she whispered. Maggie rose at once. "You're safe," she said gently, moving closer. "You're in my tavern. You came in last night." The woman searched her face. "Did I?" Her voice wavered. "I don't remember." Maggie felt the truth settle in her bones. This wasn't confusion from shock. This was something deeper. Over the next days, it became impossible to deny. Each morning, the woman woke as if in a new world. She asked the same questions, forgot the answers. Sometimes she'd remember Maggie's face, but not her name. Other times, even Maggie became a stranger again. And always, her own name was gone. "I know I had one," she would say, pressing her fingers to her temple, frustrated tears shining in her eyes. "It feels like it's just out of reach." Maggie learned to be patient. She fed her warm broth and bread, sat beside her while she ate, and listened as the woman spoke in fragments, half memories that drifted in and out like smoke. "I see a big room sometimes," she said one afternoon, staring into the fire. "With tall windows and curtains that move like waves. Is that real?" "It could be," Maggie replied. "And there's a boy," the woman murmured, her lips trembling into a sad smile. "He used to hold my hand when he was afraid of storms. I think I loved him very much." Her eyes would cloud after that, the memory slipping away before Maggie could ask more. The wolves watched from a distance at first. They had not forgotten her blood, the way her scent still carried noble sharpness. But it was hard to hate someone who smiled at them like a lost child and thanked them for every small kindness as if it were a treasure. Thomas was the first to crack. He came in one evening with a small carved wolf he'd made from scrap wood. He set it awkwardly on the counter. For her," he muttered. Maggie brought it to the old woman. Her face lit up like sunrise. "Oh," she laughed softly, cradling it in her hands. "He's handsome, isn't he? Just like you." She looked up at Thomas and winked. The tavern burst into laughter. From that night on, things changed. They started bringing her bits of food, saving the softer bread, the warmer cuts of meat. Someone found an old shawl and draped it over her shoulders when the nights grew cold. She learned their names, sometimes forgetting them again, but always greeting them with warmth. And she gave them names too. My strong one, my brave one, my noisy one. Soon the wolves began calling her grandmother. The name stuck. She laughed more. The sound was light, almost musical, filling corners of the tavern that had known only rough voices before. She sat by the fire and listened to stories, clapping her hands when someone finished a tale, even if she forgot it moments later. For the first time since she'd arrived, peace settled over the low den. Maggie watched it grow, a quiet miracle unfolding in her tavern. Yet the mystery of the woman lingered. Her posture was too graceful, her hands too soft for a life of labor. And sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would sit very straight, chin lifted, as if an old habit surfaced from somewhere deep within. But when Maggie asked, the woman only shook her head. "I'm sorry, dear. I wish I knew." So Maggie stopped asking. What mattered was who she was now. Far away, beyond the warmth of fire and ale, cold stone swallowed sound. In the towering palace of the Alpha King, silence reigned. A maid knelt trembling before the throne, head bowed, hands twisting in her apron. "My king," she whispered, "the queen, she's gone." Barrett rose slowly from his seat. "Gone," he repeated, the word dangerous in its calm. "We searched her chambers," the maid said, tears spilling. "She must have slipped past the guards during the night. I only meant to help her breathe fresh air. I didn't think—" Barrett didn't let her finish. The world narrowed to a single, terrifying truth. His mother was alone. Lost. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, his fists clenched as a cold fear he had never known wrapped around his heart. "Find her," he commanded, voice like steel. "Search every street, every den, every corner of this kingdom." The hunt began, and in a tavern built for the forgotten, a broken queen laughed by the fire, unaware that a crown was searching for her. Barrett had always believed fear was a cleaner weapon than love. Fear did not hesitate. Fear did not break. Fear obeyed. That was how he had ruled since the day the crown had been forced onto his head. By iron, by distance, by a voice that never trembled. The kingdom called him ruthless. He allowed it. A feared king kept wolves in line. But as he strode through the palace corridors now, boots echoing against cold stone, Barrett felt something he had not allowed himself in years. Fear. Not for his throne, not for rebellion, for his mother. Queen Cordea's chambers stood open, curtains stirring in the morning breeze. The room smelled faintly of lavender oil and old parchment. Guards knelt at the doorway, heads bowed, unable to meet his eyes. "She was here at dawn, my king," one said. Then, gone. Barrett stepped inside. The room was exactly as he had left it the night before. Embroidered blankets neatly folded, a half-finished cup of tea cold on the table. The small wooden box where Cordea kept the trinkets she no longer remembered the meaning of. He closed his eyes. He had locked these doors not out of cruelty, but terror. Ever since her mind had begun to slip, Cordea had wandered, forgotten herself, forgotten the palace, sometimes even forgotten him. She had once walked straight into the armory, asking the guards if they had seen her husband, dead for many years. Barrett had nearly lost her that day, so he had ordered her kept in her chambers, guards at every door, no wandering, no risks, for her safety, or so he had told himself. Now she was gone. The maid knelt behind him, shaking. "My king," she begged me, she whispered. "She said the walls were closing in, that she couldn't breathe. I only took her into the garden, I swear. But then she ran, and when I followed, she was already beyond the gate." Barrett turned slowly. The maid flinched as his cold gaze pinned her. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. She sobbed, but she looked at me like a frightened child. I couldn't say no. For a heartbeat, anger surged. Hot. Dangerous. Then he saw it. Cordea's face in his memory. Lost, confused, begging him not to leave her alone. Barrett looked away. "Leave," he said. The maid fled. He stood alone in the chamber, jaw tight, chest heavy. For all his power, all his guards and walls and commands, he had failed the one person he had sworn to protect. "Find her," he had ordered, and now he hunted. Barrett rode through the streets of his capital like a storm, cloak snapping behind him, guards struggling to keep pace. He questioned merchants, sent scouts into every alley, every market, every low den where forgotten wolves gathered. Hours passed. Then a whisper reached him. An old woman, wearing royal robes, seen stumbling into a tavern at the edge of the common quarter. Barrett's blood went cold. "What tavern?" he demanded. The guard hesitated. "They call it the Low Den, my king. It's a place for common wolves. They don't welcome nobles." Barrett's jaw hardened. Of course she would wander into the one place he would never look. The ride there felt endless. As he moved deeper into the common quarter, the streets grew narrower, rougher. The scent of ale and smoke replaced incense and polished stone. Wolves stared as he passed, some bowing, others simply watching with guarded eyes. This was not his world, and yet, it was his kingdom. He dismounted before a squat, weathered building at the end of a crooked street. Warm light spilled from its windows. Laughter drifted out, loud and alive. The sign above the door read, "The Low Den." His lips curled, a tavern built in defiance. He could smell her before he even reached the door. Lavender, old parchment, home. "She's here," he said, voice low. His guards tensed, but he lifted a hand, stopping them. This was his to face. Barrett pushed the door open. Warmth rushed over him, thick with ale, sweat, and fire. Music faltered, voices died, dozens of eyes snapped toward him, and there, near the counter, wrapped in a shawl, laughing softly at something a wolf had said, sat his mother. Queen Cordeia. For a heartbeat, relief nearly buckled his knees. Then he saw where she was, among common wolves, in a tavern that stank of spilled drink, in a place that would dare bar a king. Rage surged, swift and blinding. His eyes lifted from his mother to the woman standing behind the counter, the tavern keeper who dared shelter her. Fire burned in his gaze. This den had taken what was his, and he would have it back. The tavern fell into a silence so thick it felt like the fire itself had stopped breathing. Barrett stood in the doorway, tall and immovable, his cloak still dusted with road grit, eyes burning like twin embers. The warmth of the low den rolled over him, carrying the scents of ale, sweat, and smoke. But beneath it all, unmistakable, was his mother's scent. Home. His gaze locked onto her at once. Cordeia sat on a stool near the counter, a shawl around her shoulders, hands wrapped around a wooden mug. She was smiling at one of the wolves, her eyes soft, unguarded, alive in a way he had not seen in months. Relief surged, then anger crushed it. "What is this place?" Barrett demanded, his voice cutting through the room like steel. Maggie straightened behind the counter. She had been laughing a moment ago. Now her face was set, chin lifted, eyes sharp. "This is my tavern," she said, "and you're bringing cold air in with you." A ripple of growls spread through the wolves. They had felt it too. The weight of his presence, the pressure of an alpha king stepping into a den that did not belong to him. Barrett's eyes flicked over them with thinly veiled contempt. "A den," he echoed. "That's exactly what it is. You dare shelter a noble here?" "She's a guest," Maggie replied evenly. "Same as anyone else." Barrett let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't insult me. You know who she is." Maggie did not look at Cordeia. "I know who she is now," she said. "A woman who was lost and needed help." "That woman is my mother," Barrett snapped. "Queen Cordeia, and you will step aside while I take her home." The name rippled through the tavern like thunder. Queen. Wolves stiffened. Some took a step back. Others bristled, claws sliding free, fury rising at the idea that royalty had been sitting among them all this time. Maggie felt the room tilt, but she did not move. He took a step forward. The air seemed to tighten around him. "You have broken my law by harboring her. You will answer for that. All of you will." A low snarl rose from the wolves. Thomas moved first, stepping in front of Maggie, then another, and another, until a wall of bodies formed around her, shoulders squared, eyes glowing. "She doesn't stand alone," Thomas growled. "Not in this den." Barrett stared at them, disbelief flickering across his face. Wolves ready to die for a tavern keeper. For a heartbeat, something like shock touched him. Then he sneered. "Move." No one did. Maggie's voice cut through again, steady as stone. "You threaten my people, you threaten me, and I won't bow to you in my own tavern, crown or no crown." Barrett's jaw clenched. No one spoke to him like this. No one dared. He could feel their defiance like heat against his skin. He could crush it. One command. One roar. But his mother's soft laugh reached his ears. That sound dragged his gaze past the wall of wolves back to her. Cordeia was watching the scene with puzzled eyes, fingers gripping her mug. She looked from Maggie to Barrett, brow furrowed. He took a slow breath and stepped forward. Barrett moved toward her, brushing past the wolves with sheer will. They tensed, but did not strike. Maggie watched him go, heart hammering. He stopped in front of Cordeia and knelt, lowering himself so their eyes met. "Mother," he said, voice dropping, losing its edge. "It's me, Barrett." Cordeia tilted her head, studied him. He saw no recognition, only polite confusion. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Do I know you?" The words hit like a blade to his chest. "It's me," he insisted, forcing a smile that trembled at the edges. "Your son. The storms. You used to sing to me when I was afraid. You said thunder was just the sky talking to itself. Do you remember?" Cordeia's eyes glistened, not with memory, but with sympathy. "That sounds lovely," she said. "But I don't think I'm who you think I am." A hush fell over the tavern. Barrett swallowed. "Look at me," he whispered. "Please." She did, and still nothing. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "You seem kind, but I don't know you." Something inside Barrett cracked. He straightened slowly, pain flickering across his face before he masked it with cold steel. Around him, the wolves watched, stunned. Even Maggie felt her anger waver, replaced by something she had not expected. Pity. Barrett reached out, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air before dropping back to his side. He turned away from Cordeia and faced Maggie, eyes burning, but now with something raw beneath the fire. "You've filled her head with lies," he said hoarsely. "You've turned her against me." Maggie shook her head. "I didn't teach her anything," she said. "I just gave her a place to breathe." Barrett laughed once, bitter and hollow. "Enjoy your victory, Tavern Queen." He turned toward the door. His shoulders were stiff, his pride wounded, his heart laid bare before wolves who had nothing to do with his crown. Without another word, he walked out. The door slammed behind him, letting cold air rush in once more. Inside the low den, silence reigned. Cordeia looked after him, worry in her eyes. She turned to Maggie and asked softly, "Why did that man look at me like I was his whole world?" Maggie had no answer. Only the echo of a king's breaking heart lingering in her tavern. The palace had never felt so empty. Barrett paced the length of his chamber, boots silent on polished stone, the tall windows showing only darkness beyond. Torches burned low in their sconces, throwing long shadows across carved walls and gilded banners, symbols of power that suddenly meant nothing. Sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it again. His mother's face. Not the fragile, distant look she'd worn in her guarded chamber, but the way she had smiled in that tavern. Warm, alive, laughing with strangers as if she had known them all her life. And then her words. "I don't know you." Barrett's jaw tightened. He dragged a hand through his hair and stopped before the window, staring into the night as if the darkness might answer him. "I failed you," he muttered. He had wrapped her in silk and stone, in guards and rules, thinking he was protecting her. Yet she had found more life in a den of spilled ale than in his palace. A bitter laugh left his chest. What kind of king can't even keep his own mother safe? Another image rose unbidden. Maggie, standing behind her counter, eyes blazing, unbowed, wolves closing around her like a living shield, ready to face a king for her sake. He had commanded armies, broken rivals, made nobles kneel with a single word. Yet in that tavern, his title had meant nothing. They had not feared him. They had chosen her. Barrett sank onto the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Fear ruled. That was what he had believed. But fear had not kept his mother with him. Fear had not bought him loyalty in that den. Fear had only left him standing alone while others laughed around a fire. His chest tightened. She didn't even flinch, he whispered, thinking of Maggie. Not when I threatened her. Not when I stood before her with a crown on my head. He had expected pleading, begging, at least hesitation. Instead, he had found defiance, and something about that unsettled him more than any rebellion ever had. Barrett rose again and crossed to the small table by his bed. Upon it lay a wooden carving, rough, simple. A wolf, its edges worn smooth by his mother's hands. She had carried it since before her mind began to fade. He picked it up, turning it slowly in his palm. She smiled at them, he said quietly. At strangers. But not at me. The words hurt more spoken aloud. For the first time since he had taken the throne, Barrett let the mask crack. He pressed his fist to his chest, breathing through the ache. He had faced battles without trembling, had sentenced traitors without remorse. But this was a wound no armor could cover. He had stormed into that tavern like a conqueror, and left like a defeated son. Slowly, his breathing steadied, anger faded, pain remained, but beneath it, something else stirred, resolve. She didn't recognize me, he murmured. Then I will make her know me again, not as a king, but as someone she can trust. And Maggie. He saw her again in his mind, standing fearless before him, voice steady, choosing mercy over hatred even when it went against her own rule. What kind of woman did that? What kind of tavern keeper built loyalty so fierce wolves would bare their throats for her? I don't understand you, Barrett admitted to the empty room. But I will. He straightened, shoulders squaring, not with royal pride, but with a new purpose. This was no longer just about reclaiming his mother. It was about discovering why she had found life in that place. Why those wolves would follow Maggie into fire. Why, for the first time, Barrett had felt like a stranger in his own kingdom. Outside, the night began to thin. A faint gray line crept along the horizon. Dawn was coming. Barrett did not summon his guards. He shed his cloak, his crown, laying them on the table like burdens he could no longer carry tonight. From a chest, he drew out a simple tunic, the kind he wore in training years ago, before the throne had hardened him. He hesitated, then changed. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. No gold, no symbols of power, just a tall wolf with tired eyes and a heart too heavy for sleep. Tomorrow, he said softly, I will go back. Not as Alpha King, but as a man willing to listen. He slipped from his chamber as the first pale light touched the palace walls, moving through shadowed corridors toward the waking world beyond. And far across the city, a tavern built for the forgotten waited, unaware that before the sun fully rose, its doors would open once more to the king it had already humbled. Dawn had barely kissed the sky when Barrett reached the low den again. The street was quiet, washed in pale light, the night's laughter gone like a dream. Smoke curled from the tavern's chimney, carrying the scent of fresh bread and embers. For a moment, Barrett stood across the road, watching the humble building that had already shaken him more than any battlefield. Then he crossed. He pushed the door open. Warmth greeted him, softer now than the night before. A few wolves lingered inside, nursing mugs, speaking in low voices. They looked up sharply when he entered. Growls stirred. Barrett held his hands loose at his sides, no crown, no cloak. Just the simple tunic clinging to his broad frame. "I'm not here to fight," he said. Maggie stood behind the counter, tying her hair back. Her eyes narrowed when she saw him. "You again," she said flatly. "Didn't get enough of my den last night, Your Majesty." The title dripped with challenge. Barrett ignored the edge in her voice and stepped closer. "Where is she?" he asked. "Eating," Maggie replied, "like anyone else who stays here." Barrett exhaled, then said, "I need to see her." "That depends," Maggie said, folding her arms. "On why?" He hesitated, then his jaw tightened. "Help me," he said. The words came out stiff, like they didn't belong in his mouth. "She won't remember me. You will tell me how to make her." It sounded like a command. Maggie's eyes flashed. "You don't order me in my own tavern." Barrett bristled. "This is my mother." "And she is my guest," Maggie shot back. "And she's not a puzzle you get to solve by force." The wolves watched in tense silence. Barrett clenched his fists, then slowly forced them to loosen. "Then tell me what to do," he said, lower now. "Because I don't know." The words surprised even him. Maggie studied his face. Really looked this time. She saw the pride still there, yes, but beneath it, exhaustion. Fear. A son drowning behind a king's mask. She sighed. "You keep chasing what she used to be," Maggie said. "The mother you remember. But she's not there anymore. Not the way you want." Barrett swallowed. "You want her to look at you and suddenly remember everything," Maggie continued. "Your name, your face, your crown. But all that does is scare her. It tells her she's failing." His gaze dropped. "She lives in now," Maggie said more gently. "In this moment. In who stands in front of her today. If you want her to know you, stop dragging her into a past she can't reach. Start building something new." Barrett's chest rose and fell. "You're telling me to forget who I am to her." "I'm telling you to become someone she can know," Maggie replied. Silence stretched between them. Then slowly Barrett nodded. "Where is she?" he asked again, this time without steel. Maggie jerked her head toward the hearth. Cordeia sat there, wrapped in her shawl, crumbling bread into a bowl of broth, humming softly to herself. She looked up when she sensed movement. Her eyes met Barrett's. He froze. For a heartbeat, he almost spoke her name, almost said mother. Then he remembered Maggie's words. He forced himself to breathe, and walked over. Cordeia watched him approach, cautious but not afraid. "Good morning," she said politely. Barrett lowered himself onto the stool across from her. "Good morning," he replied. "May I sit with you?" She nodded. "Of course." They sat in silence for a moment. The fire popped softly. I'm Barrett," he said, choosing each word carefully. "I thought maybe we could talk." She smiled faintly. "I like talking. Sometimes I forget what we talk about, but I like it anyway." "That's all right," he said quickly. "We can talk again tomorrow, and the day after that." Her eyes softened. "You're kind." The word hit him harder than any insult ever had. He swallowed. "Do you like this place?" he asked. "Oh, very much," Cordeia said, glancing around. "They're good to me here. And Maggie. She reminds me of someone. I don't know who, but she feels like home." Barrett nodded, throat tight. "She's special." Cordeia studied him, then tilted her head. "You look sad," she said. "Did you lose someone?" The truth pressed against his lips, but he didn't say it. "I did," he replied quietly. "But I think I might find her again. In a different way." Cordeia reached across the small space between them and patted his hand. "Then don't give up," she said. He held very still under her touch, afraid to break the moment. Minutes passed. Then more. He told her about the weather. About the horses he used to ride as a boy. About the way storms smelled before rain. He kept his voice calm, gentle, letting the words be simple. And slowly, she leaned closer. She laughed at one of his stories, a soft, surprised sound, like she hadn't expected joy but found it anyway. Then she looked at him again. Really looked. Her eyes brightened. "You know," she said, a shy smile touching her lips, "I think I like you." Barrett's breath caught. It wasn't recognition. It wasn't memory. But it was something. His chest swelled with a fragile, dangerous hope. Maggie watched from behind the counter as Cordea's fingers rested easily over Barrett's hand, as her smile lingered. For the first time since he had entered her tavern, the Alpha King looked human. And when Cordea smiled at him again, just a little wider this time, Barrett knew he had won his first true victory. Not as a king, but as a son building new memories. One gentle moment at a time. The next evening, the low den was loud again. Music rose, mugs clattered, and firelight danced across familiar faces. Maggie moved behind the counter, steady and watchful, while Cordea sat near the hearth, smiling at anyone who passed, her hands busy folding scraps of cloth into little shapes she soon forgot she had made. Then the door opened, and for a heartbeat the tavern forgot how to breathe. Barrett stepped inside. No crown, no cloak, no guards, just a simple tunic, worn boots, and the scent of road and smoke like any other wolf who wandered in from the cold. Growls stirred, eyes narrowed. Thomas set his mug down slowly. "You lost your shine, Your Majesty," he muttered. Barrett met his gaze without heat. "I left it outside." Maggie froze behind the counter. For a moment she thought she was imagining it, that the Alpha King who had stormed her tavern now stood there looking like any common traveler. But he was real, and he was walking toward her. "What do you want now?" she asked, voice sharp. Barrett stopped in front of her. "To stay," he said, "if you'll allow it." A few wolves scoffed, others muttered in disbelief. Maggie's eyes searched his face. "This isn't your palace. No one bows here. No one cares who you are." "I know," he said. "That's why I came." She studied him a long moment, then let out a short laugh. "Fine. But if you stay, you work." Before he could answer, she grabbed a rag from the counter and tossed it at his chest. "Tables," she said, "and chairs. When the music starts, you move them back. When the mugs spill, you clean them. You don't get special treatment. You don't get space. You earn your place like everyone else." The rag slid down his tunic and landed in his hands. Silence rippled through the tavern. Barrett stared at the cloth, then up at Maggie. An Alpha King, cleaning tables. For a heartbeat, pride flared in his eyes. Then he closed his fingers around the rag. "All right," he said, and he turned to the nearest table. Maggie watched, stunned as he bent and began wiping spilled ale from the scarred wood. His movements were stiff at first, like a man unused to being anything but obeyed. But he kept at it, moved to the next table, then the next. The tavern buzzed. "Is this a joke? He's really doing it. By the moon." When the music swelled again, Barrett found himself lifting chairs, sliding tables back into place as wolves danced around him, some deliberately brushing past just to see if he would snap. He didn't. Someone spilled a mug near his feet. He knelt and wiped it up without a word. Slowly, disbelief turned into laughter. Thomas approached him, mug in hand. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to a wet streak. Barrett glanced at it, then wiped it clean. "Better?" Thomas blinked, then barked out a laugh. "You're all right, King." "Barrett," he corrected. "Just Barrett." The name seemed to surprise even him. As the night wore on, the rag was forgotten. Barrett found himself sitting at a table with a group of wolves, a mug of ale in his hand. He coughed at the first bitter gulp, earning laughter. "Not used to real drink?" one teased. "I'm used to watered wine," Barrett admitted. "This has more bite." They laughed louder. He learned names. Thomas, loud and loyal. Kira, who danced like fire. Old Bran, whose limp came from a border war Barrett barely remembered ordering. Stories flowed, rough jokes, memories of long days in fields and nights spent hungry, tales of children left behind in distant villages. Barrett listened. For once, he didn't speak as a king. He heard about broken roofs and lost harvests, about wolves who worked noble lands and still went to sleep with empty bellies, about dreams small and simple, warm bread, safe homes, a place where no one looked down on them. And in their laughter, he saw something he had never truly noticed before. Strength. Not the kind that ruled, the kind that endured. Across the room, Maggie watched. She had expected arrogance, complaints, the king tiring of the game and storming out. Instead, she saw him laugh, saw him lean close to hear over the music, saw him clap Thomas on the shoulder, grin when someone teased him, and thank Kira when she refilled his mug. He didn't demand space. He made space. Her arms loosened where they'd been crossed. For the first time, doubt crept into her hatred. Later, when the music slowed and the crowd thinned, Barrett wandered toward the hearth. Cordeia looked up and smiled. "You're back," she said. "Yes," he replied softly. "I like it here." She patted the bench beside her. "Sit with me." He did. They watched the fire together, quiet and easy, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maggie approached, stopping a few steps away. "You surprised me," she admitted. Barrett looked up at her. "I'm trying to learn." She studied him, really studied him. The crown was gone, the fear was gone. In its place stood a man discovering his people for the first time. "Don't think this changes everything," she warned. "One night doesn't erase what your kind has done to mine." "I know," he said, "but maybe it can be a start." Maggie didn't answer, but as she turned back to her counter, the fire in her eyes had softened, just a little. And for Barrett, sitting among wolves who had once been nothing but shadows to him, the kingdom finally began to feel real. The nights that followed began to blur into something warm. Barrett kept coming back, not as a king, as Barrett. He wiped tables when Maggie tossed him the rag, lifted chairs when the music swelled, sat by the hearth with Cordeia when the crowd thinned. The wolves no longer growled when he entered. Some even called out his name, waving him over with mugs raised. And Maggie? Maggie watched. She told herself it meant nothing, that she was only making sure he didn't forget his place. But she found her eyes following him more often than they should, catching the way he laughed now, free and unguarded, or how gently he spoke to Cordeia, as if every word might shatter her if spoken too loudly. One evening, after the music had slowed and most of the wolves had drifted home, Maggie found him outside behind the tavern, sitting on an upturned crate. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of firewood and damp earth. "You're early to disappear tonight," she said, stepping into the lantern glow. Barrett looked up. "Cordeia fell asleep. Thomas promised to keep an eye on her." Maggie nodded and leaned against the wall, arms folded. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Barrett broke the silence. "Why did you really let her stay?" he asked quietly. "Even when you thought she was just a noble." Maggie's jaw tightened. "Because I hate nobles," she said bluntly. "And I didn't want to hate myself more." He studied her face. "That's not the whole truth." She sighed and looked away, eyes drifting to the dark sky. "When I was a girl," she began, "my father took me into a tavern in the noble quarter. We were hungry, cold. He thought maybe we could trade a day's work for a bowl of stew." Her voice hardened. "They didn't even let us speak. The owner dragged us out by the collars and threw us into the mud, said we were dirty, said we were lowering the place just by standing there." Barrett felt a twist in his chest. "I remember my father kneeling in the dirt, apologizing for something he didn't do," Maggie continued. "I remember laughter from inside. I was small, but I swore something that night." She turned to him, eyes burning. "I swore I'd build a place where no one would ever be thrown out for being poor, or broken, or unwanted, where status meant nothing." She gestured back toward the low den. This is that vow. Barrett was silent. He had ordered men thrown out of halls before, had never wondered where they landed. I'm sorry, he said finally. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Maggie studied him, then gave a short, humorless laugh. You're not the one who did it, but you wear the crown that lets it happen. I know, he replied, and that's what I'm starting to see. They stood in the quiet, the tavern's warmth glowing behind them. Barrett spoke again, softer. So why help my mother? Maggie didn't answer at once. When she did, her voice was lower. Because this tavern isn't just for the poor, it's for the broken, and when she walked in shaking and lost, that's all I saw. Not a queen, not a noble, just someone whose world had fallen apart. She met his gaze. I couldn't turn her away. Not without becoming the very thing I hate. Something in Barrett's eyes shifted. Respect. Admiration. And beneath it, something more dangerous. You're stronger than most wolves I know, he said. Maggie snorted. I just refuse to be small. A quiet smile tugged at his lips. From inside, laughter rose again. Music flared back to life as someone struck the drum. Maggie glanced toward the door. Looks like they're starting again. They went back in together. The tavern was alive, wolves clapping, stamping, spinning in pairs. Near the center of it all stood Cordeia, holding Thomas's hands, laughing as he tried to guide her steps. Then she spotted Barrett. Her face lit up. There you are, she called, releasing Thomas and hurrying over. Come, they're teaching me to dance. Barrett blinked. Dance? Yes, she said, grabbing his hands before he could protest. You can't sit forever. The wolves cheered as she pulled him into the circle. At first, Barrett moved stiffly, unsure, but Cordeia laughed, light and bright, and he found himself smiling back. He followed her steps, turning when she turned, catching her when she stumbled. She was glowing. Not the quiet, fragile woman of the hearth, but alive, laughing, spinning beneath the lantern light. Maggie watched from the edge of the room. She saw the way Barrett leaned close to hear Cordeia over the music. The way he laughed when she stepped on his foot. The way she looked at him now, not with confusion, but with warmth. And something in Maggie's chest shifted. She had wanted to protect the broken queen. She had not expected to watch her heal. Nor had she expected the ache that came with seeing Barrett there. No crown, no fear, just a man dancing with his mother like the world had finally given him back a piece of what he'd lost. Their eyes met across the room. For a heartbeat, everything else faded. Fire crackled, music thundered, wolves laughed. And between Maggie and Barrett, something unspoken flared to life, dangerous, bright, and impossible to ignore. The fire beneath Maggie's heart had found its match. The rumors began as whispers. They slipped through markets and alleys, crawled along tavern walls, and rode on the backs of nervous messengers. The Alpha King, scrubbing tables in a common den, drinking ale with farmers, laughing with wolves who had no titles, and at the heart of it all, a tavern keeper. By the third night, the whispers had teeth. They called Maggie a witch, said she had bewitched the king with low magic and foul charms, said she had turned Queen Cordeia against her own blood. Maggie heard the first threat at dawn. A breathless runner burst into the low den, eyes wide. They're talking about burning this place down, he said. Nobles from the upper quarter. They say your tavern is an insult to the crown. Maggie set down the mug she was washing. Her jaw tightened. Let them talk. But the talk didn't stop. By evening, wolves gathered in tense clusters, voices low, fear creeping into eyes that had only just learned to laugh again. This place is all we have, Kira whispered. They'll take it from us, old Bran muttered. They always do. The door burst open. Armored guards flooded in, steel flashing, boots thundering against wood. The tavern erupted in snarls as wolves leapt to their feet. In the name of the crown! The captain barked. Maggie of the Low Den, you are under arrest for treason and witchcraft against the realm. Gasps rippled through the room. Her wolves surged closer. We won't let them take you, Thomas growled. Maggie turned to them, voice steady. You will, she said softly, because this tavern survives only if you do. Her gaze swept over their faces. No fighting, no blood, promise me. Reluctantly, one by one, they nodded. As they dragged her toward the door, Maggie lifted her voice. Keep the fire burning, she called to her wolves, no matter what happens. The door slammed behind her. The Low Den was left in shaken silence. The court chamber was a world away from spilled ale and laughter. High stone walls loomed over Maggie as she was pushed forward, chains clinking at her wrists. Torches lined the hall, their flames cold and unforgiving. At the far end sat the noble council, wolves draped in silk and jewels, faces carved with disdain. Murmurs rose as Maggie was thrown to her knees. That's her. The tavern witch. The one who ensnared the king. Silence, barked the presiding lord. Maggie lifted her head, refusing to bow. You stand accused, he declared, of using dark magic to sway the Alpha King, of harboring the Queen to weaken royal authority, and of inciting rebellion among common wolves. A ripple of agreement followed. Maggie laughed once, sharp and bitter. If feeding the hungry is witchcraft, then yes, she said. I'm guilty. If giving the broken a place to sit is treason, then chain me deeper. The nobles hissed. You will mind your tone, another snapped. You forget your place. No, Maggie replied. I've lived my place all my life. They leaned closer, eyes glinting. Your den has grown too bold, too loud. It teaches common wolves to forget who they are. That is dangerous. Maggie's eyes burned. No, it teaches them they matter. The presiding lord rose. Enough. Until the Alpha King returns to his senses, we will deal with you. At dawn, judgment will be passed, and your tavern will be seized. A cold weight settled in Maggie's chest. Dragged to her feet, she was led to the center of the chamber, and left there, alone beneath towering stone and accusing eyes. No fire, no laughter, no wolves at her back. Just Maggie. Standing before the nobles who had waited all their lives to see someone like her brought low. And somewhere beyond those walls, a tavern full of broken wolves held its breath, fearing the dawn might steal everything they had built. Cold stone pressed against Maggie's bare knees as dawn crept into the high windows of the court. She had not slept. The night had been long, filled with murmurs from behind heavy doors, with the scrape of guards' boots, with the quiet echo of her own breathing in the vast chamber where she'd been left alone. But Maggie had not bowed. Not once. When the torches were replaced by pale morning light, the noble council returned. Silk rustled, jewels glinted. Perfumed air chased away the scent of fire and ale that still clung faintly to Maggie's clothes. The presiding lord took his seat, eyes hard. Bring the tavern keeper forward. Guards hauled Maggie to her feet and pushed her to the center of the hall. You have had the night to consider your crimes, the lord said. Witchcraft, treason, corrupting the Alpha King, harboring the Queen to weaken royal authority. Maggie lifted her chin. I have considered nothing, she replied, because I have done nothing wrong. A hiss of outrage rippled through the nobles. You will answer for your arrogance, another snarled. Your den breeds defiance. It fills common wolves with ideas above their station. Maggie's eyes flashed. And what station is that? To break their backs in your fields and vanish when the work is done? Silence faltered. Then the murmurs rose again. The presiding lord slammed his staff against the stone. Enough. We will not be lectured by a tavern girl. Maggie took a slow breath, then she spoke. Let me ask you something, she said, voice steady but carrying through the hall. If you hate common wolves so much, why do you let them farm your crops? A few nobles shifted. Why do you let them build your houses? Maggie continued. Lift your stones, mend your roads, fight your wars. No one interrupted her now. If we are so low, she went on, eyes burning. Why do you need our hands for every hard thing you refuse to do yourselves? The hall fell still. Maggie took a step forward, chains clinking softly. Why are we only useful when the work is dirty, but suddenly unworthy when it comes to decisions? To respect? To being heard? Her voice rose, not in anger, but in truth. Tell me, if we are nothing, then what does that make a kingdom built on our backs? The question hung in the air like thunder before a storm. No noble spoke. Some stared at their laps, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few clenched their jaws, but even they did not answer. Because there was no answer. The great doors at the back of the hall creaked open. Boots echoed across stone. Every head turned. Barrett entered. Not in simple tunic, but not in full splendor either. He wore his crown now, but no cloak. No guards at his side. Just the weight of the throne in his eyes as he strode forward. My king, the presiding lord said quickly, rising. We were just... I heard her, Barrett said. His voice cut through the chamber, cold and sharp. He stopped beside Maggie, not above her, but at her side. I heard every word. Maggie did not look at him. She kept her gaze on the nobles. Barrett turned to face them. You accuse this woman of witchcraft, of treason, of turning me against you. His eyes narrowed. But all I see is someone brave enough to say what you've spent years pretending not to hear. A murmur of unease rippled through the council. She has overstepped, my king, one noble protested. She teaches common wolves to forget their place. Barrett's gaze snapped to him. No, she reminds them they have one. Silence fell again. Barrett looked back at Maggie. For a moment, the court saw not a king addressing a prisoner, but a man looking at a woman who had changed him. Pride softened his features. This tavern keeper showed my mother kindness when my palace could not, he said. She gave her warmth when all I had left her were walls. A few nobles shifted, eyes widening. And she has shown me something as well, Barrett continued. That loyalty cannot be commanded, it must be earned. He faced the council again, his voice hardening. From this moment on, Maggie of the Low Den stands under my protection. Gasps rose. Anyone who threatens her, Barrett said, each word deliberate, threatens the crown itself, and I will answer that threat with every ounce of power I possess. The presiding lord swallowed. My king. The council only sought to protect the realm. Then start by protecting its people, Barrett snapped. All of them. He turned to the guards. Unchain her. They hesitated. Now. The chains fell away from Maggie's wrists, clinking against the stone. She straightened slowly, rolling her shoulders as feeling returned to her arms. Barrett met her eyes. You are free. Maggie looked around the hall, at the nobles who had tried to crush her, at the stone walls that had swallowed so many voices before hers. Then she spoke again, softly this time. I didn't come here to be protected by a crown, she said. I came here because someone had to speak. Barrett inclined his head. And you did. One by one, nobles lowered their gazes. Some in shame, some in fear, some in grudging respect. Maggie turned and walked out of the court with her head high. Not as a tavern keeper, but as a force the kingdom could no longer pretend didn't exist. And behind her, on the throne of stone and power, Alpha King Barrett watched her go with pride burning in his chest, knowing that no crown he had ever worn would outweigh the woman who had just shaken his realm with a single question. The Low Den had never burned so bright. Word of Maggie's return raced ahead of her, carried by paws and breathless voices through crooked streets. By the time she reached the tavern, wolves were already pouring in from every direction. Farmers, builders, scarred fighters, laughter and tears tangled together in the night air. When Maggie stepped through the door, the room erupted. Cheers thundered against the rafters. Mugs slammed on tables. Wolves surged forward, surrounding her, touching her arms, her shoulders, as if to prove she was real. She's back! They let her go. Our Maggie, she laughed through the noise, eyes shining, heart pounding, as she was pulled into embraces rough and warm and real. Behind her, Barrett entered quietly. This time, no one growled. They saw the crown. They saw the king. And then they saw the way he looked at Maggie. Respect. Pride. Something deeper that made even the roughest wolves fall silent for a heartbeat. Then the music started. A drum struck up its wild rhythm. Someone hauled Maggie into the circle, and soon she was dancing, boots stomping, hair loose around her shoulders, laughter spilling from her lips. Barrett found himself pulled in as well, hands clapping, feet moving, his voice joining the cheers. Ale flowed. Firelight leapt. The tavern became a storm of joy. Cordeia stood near the hearth at first, watching with wide eyes. Then she saw Barrett and waved at him. "Come," she called. "They're dancing again." Barrett crossed to her and offered his hands. "Will you dance with me?" She smiled like it was the easiest question in the world. "I'd like that." They stepped into the circle together. Cordeia moved slowly, carefully, but her laughter rang clear as bells as Barrett guided her, turning when she turned, catching her when she stumbled. Wolves clapped and cheered them on, joy rising with every step. Maggie watched from across the room, breath caught in her chest. Cordeia wasn't confused tonight. She wasn't afraid. She was alive, and she was dancing with her son, even if she didn't know the word for him. Something warm spread through Maggie's heart. Later, when the music slowed and the crowd thinned, Barrett approached her, 2 mugs in hand. "One more before they drink us dry?" he asked. She took it with a smirk. "Careful, King. You're getting used to this." "Maybe I am," he said. They drank together, leaning against the counter, watching wolves laugh and sway in tired pairs. For a while, they simply stood there, sharing the quiet beneath the noise. Then Barrett straightened. "Walk with me." Maggie hesitated, then nodded. They slipped outside into the cool night. The moon hung full above them, bathing the street in silver light. From inside, muffled laughter and music drifted through the walls. But out here, the world felt hushed, as if holding its breath. Barrett stopped a few steps from the door and turned to her. "Maggie," he said, voice low. "You changed me." She lifted a brow. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a tavern keeper." "I mean it," he continued. "Before you, I thought ruling meant being feared. I thought distance was strength. But in your den, I saw my kingdom for the first time. I saw what my crown was built on." He stepped closer. "You showed my mother kindness when I couldn't. You stood before my nobles when no one else dared. You taught me that loyalty isn't taken. It's given." Maggie's heart thudded hard in her chest. "I don't know how to be the king you deserve yet," Barrett said. "But I know this. I don't want to walk this path without you." He took a breath, steadying himself. "Be my mate," he said. "My Luna, my queen." The words hung between them, heavy as the moonlight. Maggie searched his face. The crown was there, the power. But so was the man who had wiped her tables and listened to broken wolves and learned their names. She didn't answer at once. Instead, she said quietly, "If I stand beside you, I won't be a pretty figure in silk. I won't sit silent while my people are forgotten." He nodded. "I wouldn't want you to." She lifted her chin. "Then hear me. I will only accept if common wolves are no longer shadows in your kingdom, if they are brought into the system. Given voices, given chances. I live for them, Barrett. I die for them. If I am queen, I will be their queen." The night seemed to still. Barrett didn't hesitate. "I accept," he said at once. "Not as a bargain, as a promise." Maggie's breath caught. "You don't even know how hard that'll be," she whispered. "I do," he replied, "and I will do it anyway." For a long moment they simply stood there, moonlight washing over them, the weight of everything they'd survived between them. Then Maggie stepped closer. "So that's your choice," she said softly. "And this is mine." She reached for his hands. Barrett's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, as if afraid to let go. Slowly, he leaned in. Maggie didn't pull away. Their lips met beneath the moon, gentle at first, then sure, carrying every unspoken promise, every wound, every hope neither had dared name before. When they parted, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling. Inside the tavern, laughter rose again. Outside, under silver light, a king and a tavern keeper stood hand in hand, no longer divided by crown or class, but bound by a choice that would change a kingdom. And for the first time, Maggie allowed herself to believe. She might just become its queen. The mating ceremony was set for the next full moon. Word spread faster than any royal decree ever had, not carried by messengers in silk, but by wolves in dust-stained boots, by laughter in markets, by songs whispered over shared bread. The Alpha King would take a tavern keeper as his mate. Some nobles scoffed, some snarled, but none dared stand against it. Because Maggie was no longer just a woman with a den of fire and ale behind her. She was the voice that had shaken the court. On the night of the full moon, the great square before the palace filled with wolves from every corner of the realm. Common and noble stood side by side, uneasy at first, but bound by the weight of what they had come to witness. Torches ringed the square, their flames dancing in the wind. At the center stood an ancient stone dais, worn smooth by generations of feet and vows. Maggie walked forward from the crowd. She wore no silk, only a simple white gown, tied with a leather cord at her waist, her dark hair braided back with small wildflowers woven in. Wolves parted before her, eyes bright, some wet with tears. Barrett waited on the dais. No armor, no cloak, just the crown upon his head and fire in his eyes. When Maggie reached him, the world seemed to still. The elder stepped forward, his voice carrying across the square. By moon and blood, by fire and vow, we gather to witness the ancient bond. Do you, Barrett of the High Throne, choose this woman as your mate and Luna? Barrett didn't look away from Maggie. I do. And do you, Maggie of the Low Den, the elder said, choose this king as your mate to stand beside him and shape the realm? Maggie lifted her chin. I do. A low murmur rolled through the crowd, rising into cheers. The elder nodded, then stepped forward. Barrett took Maggie's hands. They both bared their wrists, exposing skin where the pulse beat strong. For a heartbeat, Maggie hesitated. Then she remembered her father in the mud, the fire of her tavern, the broken wolves who had found home behind her doors. And she leaned in. They marked each other in the ancient way, teeth-piercing skin, not in violence, but in vow. Pain flared, sharp and brief, followed by a warmth that rushed through her like fire in her veins. The crowd roared as their scents mingled, new and powerful, carrying across the square. Barrett pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. My mate, he whispered. My king, she replied. The elder lifted a simple circlet of dark silver, etched with the symbols of unity, and placed it into Barrett's hands. Barrett turned to Maggie. This crown is not for power, he said, loud enough for all to hear. It is for service, for every wolf in this kingdom, noble or common. He set it upon her head. I crown you Maggie of the Low Den, he declared, queen and Luna of this realm. The hall erupted. Cheers thundered. Wolves howled to the moon. Even nobles, stiff-backed and uneasy, lowered their heads in submission. Maggie's chest swelled as the sound washed over her. Then Cordeia stepped forward. She wore a soft blue gown, her silver hair brushed neatly back. She paused before Maggie, studying her with gentle eyes. You're very beautiful, Cordeia said. You look like someone who brings light. Maggie's throat tightened. She knelt before her. Thank you, she whispered. Cordeia reached out and pulled her into an embrace. The crowd hushed as the broken queen held the new one close, stroking her hair like a mother would. I don't remember many things, Cordeia murmured, but I know this. You were kind to me when I was lost. Maggie closed her eyes, tears slipping free. You were never lost here. Barrett watched, heart full as his mother embraced the woman who had given her back pieces of herself. In the days that followed, change moved through the kingdom like fire. Not the kind that burns, the kind that warms. Barrett kept his promise. Common wolves were brought into councils, given voices in matters that shaped their lives. Lands were shared, laws rewritten, and across the realm, new taverns rose, built in the spirit of the Low Den. Places where no wolf was turned away. Where nobles and commons sat at the same tables, drank from the same mugs, and learned slowly to see each other as more than titles. Some nobles grumbled, but they came. Because the king came. And the queen welcomed them all with the same steady gaze. On a quiet night, weeks after the marking, Maggie stood once more inside the Low Den. It hadn't changed much. The same scarred tables, the same fire in the hearth, the same laughter rising to the rafters. But now, nobles sat beside farmers. Builders clinked mugs with guards, and no one looked away. Barrett stood beside her, a hand resting at her back. Strange, he said softly. I used to think this place was beneath me. Maggie smiled. Now it holds your throne. He chuckled and leaned closer. It always did. I just couldn't see it. They watched as wolves danced and laughed, firelight flickering over faces no longer divided by fear. Maggie reached for his hand. He squeezed back. In the glow of the hearth, a king and a tavern keeper stood together, not above their people, but among them. And in that firelit room, where no one was low, the kingdom found its true crown, not forged from gold, but from love that dared to change the world.